On August 15, 1945, wireless sets throughout the United Kingdom broadcast a powerful declaration from Prime Minister Clement Attlee. Japan had formally offered its surrender. Crowds gathered in Piccadilly Circus to celebrate well into the night. The British Empire, though severely weakened, had endured. Yet, the United Kingdom soon faced an even more significant threat to its global status. Severe difficulties persisted after the Axis powers' downfall. Cities in the home country were devastated, and reconstruction was as immense a task as the government was financially ruined, owing $40 billion to foreign creditors by 1946. They became reliant on their ally, the United States, for funding. Although relations with the U.S. were friendly, American leaders expressed disapproval of sustaining British colonial enterprises. The funds provided by the Anglo-American Loan of 1946 and subsequently the Marshall Plan made it difficult for the British government to meaningfully influence the Truman administration. As the Iron Curtain descended upon Europe, the UK also found itself progressively less able to influence international affairs. Emerging superpowers like the US and the Soviet Union dominated the post-war world and began their long-term strategic rivalry. While the UK allied itself with the Western capitalist democracies, it functioned as a junior partner, burdened by issues at home and within its colonies. The Second World War exposed the fragile hold the British Empire maintained over its colonies. The United Kingdom heavily depended on its overseas territories to support the war effort during its most critical period. Burma and Malaya bore the brunt of the fighting as the Imperial Japanese Armed Forces tore through British defenses. Britain's reputation as a strong, unchallenged colonial master was shattered as the Japanese Navy and Army decisively defeated and humiliated British garrisons in Southeast Asia. This perceived vulnerability was an opportunity for the largest colony, India, to intensify its push for independence. Indians held deep resentment toward colonial rule, and with members of the upper classes having received British schooling, the independence movement became larger and more sophisticated. For years, the British Raj struggled under the pressure of a rapidly increasing population, a rising number of Indian civil servants, and escalating sectarian strife. The long-standing strategy of placating the princes and manipulating major ethnic or religious groups against each other was failing. A weakened Britain, short of funds and lacking the resolve to suppress the massive subcontinent, yielded. Despite Winston Churchill's insistence that India be retained, Attlee's government sought a method for transferring power. He assigned Lord Louis Mountbatten to oversee the transition and independence of India. As the last Viceroy and first Governor-General of India, Lord Mountbatten aimed to preserve peace between the powerful rival factions while avoiding partition. He and his charismatic wife hosted key leaders of the independence movement, such as Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Jawaharlal Nehru, and Mahatma Gandhi, to manage these formidable personalities. But decades of deliberately exploiting divisions crippled their efforts. Despite his personal desire to maintain unity, Mountbatten concluded that partition was the only peaceful solution possible within his tight time frame. With independence came a tumultuous and bloody partition of India between Hindus and Muslims. Minority religious and ethnic groups suffered terribly as massacres and street battles erupted across the subcontinent. The British colonial police and military forces were far too small and intimidated to prevent the worst of the violence. The loss of India was painful. For decades, the civil service in India had served as a training ground for ambitious members of the British government, military, and press. More broadly, the imperial project captivated the imagination and attention of British society and culture. The Raj had long been recognized as the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. At its greatest extent, the British Empire spanned a quarter of the world's land and population. To help manage it, the British required thousands of translators for diplomatic, educational, and communication purposes across countless languages. Thanks to today's sponsor, LingoPie, you won't need a translator to manage your personal empire or to navigate new cultures and communicate effectively with native speakers. LingoPie is an innovative platform that transforms language learning into an immersive, enjoyable experience by utilizing real TV shows, movies, and music from the culture whose language you're learning. exposing you to authentic accents, slang, and cultural expressions, and helping you grasp social nuances that textbooks often miss. Using interactive subtitles, you can click on any word for an instant translation and save it for future review.
As someone who is sometimes challenged by... I can't do Spanish, man. What? What's going on here? As someone who is sometimes challenged by pronunciaciones, I was particularly impressed by LingoPie's comprehensive input tools, which include flashcards, pronunciation practice, and playback controls, helping to reinforce learning while maintaining engagement. The platform's wide range of content ensures you'll find material suiting to your level and interests. LingoPie can also be accessed on mobile, web, or smart TV, allowing me to integrate it seamlessly into my routine so I can study at my own pace anywhere. If you are ready to begin your journey and learn one of the 14 languages, including Spanish, French, German, and Chinese, click on our link in the description and get a 7-day free trial, plus 55% off a yearly plan when you sign up for LingoPie today. British-held Palestine became an embarrassing catastrophe. After decades of issuing contradictory promises to Zionist and Arab groups regarding settlement and rule of the Holy Land, violence escalated in the region. The Attlee government and the British Mandate failed to halt the flow of Jewish immigration. After the war, Truman, who sought unity among the Western Allies, pressured Britain to permit more Jewish immigration. Simultaneously, Zionist paramilitary groups attacked British authorities and troops. When colonial forces retaliated, their actions were often framed as anti-Semitic and a continuation of the horrors of the Holocaust. To avoid further costs, the British dissolved the Mandate on May 15, 1948. Similar to the partition of India, sectarian violence quickly devolved into ethnic cleansing and massacres. The absence of British authority enabled Israelis to unilaterally declare the State of Israel and for Truman to recognize it, despite the UN's Resolution 181 proposal to divide the region into 2 states. The partition of India and the dissolution of the British Mandate were the beginning of the end for the British Empire. They inflicted severe psychological blows on the British government and its people. The United Kingdom's remaining colonies in Asia and Africa perceived this weakness. Independence movements emerged in Burma and Malaya. When the Conservative Party regained power domestically, negotiations deteriorated as repression became the new policy. With the perceived threat of communism looming globally, quashing these movements gained heightened priority. During the Malayan emergency, the United Kingdom simultaneously supported Malaya's democratic process towards independence while engaging in combat with the communist Malayan National Liberation Army. With Commonwealth backing, the insurgents were defeated in 1960, 3 years after Malaya gained independence. Like their Asian counterparts, the African British colonies sought to break free from the empire. Severing ties with imperial authority involved a mixture of negotiation and the suppression of insurgents colony by colony. A pattern became evident. The more Europeans resided in a colony, the more willing the United Kingdom was to use force in delaying or denying independence. Kenya's struggle for independence was particularly bloody. Racism and retaliatory actions characterized the British response to the anti-colonial movement known as the Mau Mau. Guerrilla fighters and alleged supporters were rounded up and placed in detention camps. It was the Suez Crisis that fully exposed the bleak reality of restoring any facade of British international authority. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal Company in 1956, seizing control from British and French shareholders. The canal was a crucial artery for maritime trade and had been a strategic linchpin in both world wars. Angered by the seizure, French and British diplomats demanded that Nasser return the canal. The Egyptian president refused, asserting his government's ownership.
Forming an alliance with France and Israel, British armed forces rapidly moved to secure the vital waterway, fearing Nasser would close the canal to European traffic. The partners sought assistance and participation from the United States. However, President Dwight Eisenhower flatly rejected the offer, stating his unwillingness for America to join a colonial war. The alliance's military forces quickly overwhelmed the Egyptian army and took control. But the Cold War superpowers intervened. Both the US and USSR agreed that the British, French, and Israelis had to relinquish the Canal Zone and that Egypt was to operate it. The incident was a devastating reminder of which powers in the world exerted real influence. The UK was decisively not one of them. Not all decolonization movements resulted in civil war. Nigeria departed the empire through relatively peaceful means. By the late 1950s, Parliament, now under conservative control, viewed the maintenance of colonies as a massive drain on a fragile economy. Granting freedom made financial sense. The further loss of prestige and embarrassment on the world stage following the Suez Crisis further encouraged Britain to release its former colonies in Africa. As the empire's disintegration accelerated, the consequences of decolonization reached British shores. Immigration from current and former colonies transformed the composition of British society. After 1948, the Windrush generation of immigrants from the Caribbean arrived in the home islands to provide labor for rebuilding the country. People from Kenya, Pakistan, India, and Hong Kong, among many others, established communities in British cities. Discrimination and racism from native-born Britons, some experiencing increasing financial hardship through the 1970s, became prevalent. Added to the simmering racial, ethnic, and sectarian ferment was the continuing and increasingly violent troubles in Northern Ireland. Although the majority of Ireland achieved independence in 1922, the Protestant-majority counties in the northeast remained within the British Union. Violence between Catholics and Protestants, Unionists and Nationalists erupted into a prolonged insurgency involving the Provisional Irish Republican Army and the British government. Street battles, terrorist attacks, and reprisals plunged Northern Ireland into chaos from the 1960s until 1998, when the Good Friday Agreement established an uneasy peace. The violence spilled over to Great Britain as IRA members carried out assassinations and bombings. The British public felt insecure and anxious. With its global influence waning, the United Kingdom held firmly to tiny, far-flung outposts across the globe. Although not rich in resources, these small islands were in strategic locations that provided the armed forces with bases for conducting military operations far from home. Gibraltar, Diego Garcia, and Cyprus served as staging grounds for the Royal Navy and Air Force. These bases projected power, allowing the UK to punch above its weight. Even if these islands were little more than rocks in the middle of the ocean, Britain went to great lengths to defend them. During the 1980s, Britain's resolve to protect these distant outposts was tested. The Argentine government eyed the Falklands, Malvinas, a group of islands off the east coast of Argentina. These British possessions had little in the way of industry or resources. Nevertheless, as a matter of national pride, the Argentine junta reasoned that an invasion would be the best way to enforce its sovereignty claims over the Falklands. They perhaps assumed that Britain was too weak or too distant to respond forcefully.
Britain, in the midst of a recession and under the government of the unpopular Margaret Thatcher, struck back with all the force the remnants of the empire could muster. Determined to retake the Falklands, the Royal Air Force, Navy, and Army mobilized and fought over vast distances. Although the United States was cautious about a conflict between the UK and Argentina, fearing it would push the South American government into the arms of the Soviet Union, the Reagan administration provided covert and tacit support for the military operations. Despite setbacks and logistical challenges, Britain emerged victorious. At last, it seemed that the old pride of the empire had returned. The country reveled in the glow of victory and the apparent ability to shape world affairs once again. The Conservative Party was rewarded with a landslide re-election in 1983, fresh off the military success. However, the reality of continued decolonization soon challenged the country's rediscovered pride. The fate of Hong Kong loomed large as the 1990s approached. The island colony in China became a new pressure point. The Crown had secured permanent access to Hong Kong Island and Kowloon, while the surrounding new territories were leased for 99 years in 1898 through a treaty. After the Second World War, Britain watched warily as the communist government took control of Beijing. The Chinese Communist Party sought to reverse the legacy of imperialism, and Hong Kong remained a sensitive issue. Though not seriously contemplating military action to reclaim the island city, the Chinese government was firm that reunion would occur once the lease expired. British negotiators attempted to renegotiate the old treaty, but without success. Hong Kong would inevitably return to Chinese control. The Foreign Office attempted to ascertain the extent to which the city would be integrated into the People's Republic of China. Concerns were widespread about how the Communist Party would treat the democratic practices and government of the soon-to-be former colony. It became clear that Hong Kong would be treated similarly to a few other Chinese cities that operated with some economic freedom. Some citizens of the city were not so easily reassured and immigrated throughout the Anglophone world, with many relocating to Great Britain. With no option to maintain control, Britain oversaw yet another transfer of government ceremony. As the Union Jack was lowered and the Chinese flag raised high into the night sky on July 1, 1997, it could be fairly said that the sun had indeed set on the British Empire. Britain struggled in a new world order that no longer acknowledged its traditional role as a world superpower. Decolonization challenged Britain at a time of strategic, economic, and diplomatic weakness. Once colonies began to break away, it became impossible to halt the process. How would Britain establish an identity without an empire? It's a question that continues to resonate with the country today.